So my name is Shefik. I invite you to take this journey with me. When I was around 11 years old, my father attempted to murder my mother right in front of me. At the time, we lived in a house located in Long Island, New York, and it was late in the night. I woke from my sleep to hear curious sounds, which I quickly translated to be disturbing. Immediately upon exiting my bedroom, I was thrust upon the vision of seeing my father in the hallway strangling my mother by the neck. It was apparent that he was being relentless in his physical attack, and although my mother tried as hard as she could to counter the attack, she was not able to overpower him. Due to my young age, my comprehension of life had yet to process the meaning of violence. Therefore, I didn't understand what I was seeing, and I didn't know how to react. As a result, the impact of this vision forced my body to restrict itself in place, although it pained me to see my mother in pain. Up until this point, the window pane of my life was draped with curtains that deflected certain ills of society. Although I already acknowledged the existence of pain, I had yet to bear knowledge to its remedy. I was not prepared to be in this moment. I was not equipped to be outside of myself and my sheltered element. Fortunately, we had a female tenant who rented a spare bedroom in the house. Her boyfriend happened to be visiting that night, and he certainly knew how to react. Just as my father positioned my mother to throw her off the second floor balcony, the tenant's boyfriend stepped in to intervene. My mother was then able to free herself from my father's death grip. With motherly instinct, she quickly grabbed me and ran out of the house, as I inherently became an outsider to myself. Although my mother survived that night, the survival of my own life was left to question. In the events that followed, it was revealed to me that the man who I considered to be my father was not actually my father at all. Rather, he was my stepfather by way of marriage. Everyone else already knew this fact, so it was never kept a secret. However, this fact bypassed me. Again, my comprehension of life hindered my youthful thought process. It didn't occur to me that I needed to question the validity of my parental units, despite the fact that a younger version of myself was actually in the wedding photos. In fact, I was given a role in the wedding itself. An impending divorce and reshift of life led my mother to introduce me to my biological father in person, who I never knew existed. This revelation granted me access to take one step back inside myself. It would take many years to comprehend what I was truly getting myself into. You're going to die. There's no reason to be afraid, and there's no reason to think of regret. In order to live, you must accept that someday you will die. Perhaps you have wondered about death, questioned yourself about what it means to die, what happens after life ends, or maybe what it means to be a part of death itself. Answers are not so easy to find, and they are even harder to give. I will let you imagine for yourself what death really means, and instead, I will talk about death for the living. What an odd, contrary concept. Yet it is not so alien a thing. Consider what it means to remain alive as others pass. Ask yourself what death leaves behind. Decide for yourself what things are to be cherished and what must be allowed to fade. Whether you remember the way a loved one laughed, or perhaps the awful joy of a late relative's style address. It is precisely these things, incessant details, which remain of most people after death. That is what death is for the living, the definition of what it means to be human, to burn with bioluminescence, and with a whisper, go dark. Death for the living is the knowledge that nothing is meant or made to last forever, and all things must eventually go dark. But while the light remains, it is our decision, in our own terms, what we save, what we cherish, and what we keep with us, after the physical appearance of others have gone. Then there's murder. The ultimate death, as it may be said by some. Many have sought the answer to the question of what be worse than the taking of another life, but the answer is elusive. Many would also say that murder is an act so foul that requires a response of death in return. A death for death. You should question this with all your heart. You should think about death and what it means to inhale and exhale, to ignite and extinguish, and then ask yourself whether you still feel just in giving out death, even as a payment for murder. It is apparent that death does not take into account who we were in life. So if death is above what it means to be alive, and if no consideration of either your good or bad deeds can move death, it begs to question whether it should be within the realm of reasoned choice to consider what death itself does not. Let there be no doubt, murder is a terrible thing, but it's still death, and death remains a thing beyond the scope of human understanding. We should not strive to observe the providence of divine and see too far beyond the veil. Leave murder to death and instead search for the understanding inherent in death for the living. I have found my own understanding, and now you must find yours. As I traversed the journey of my life, I came to realize that I carried a lot of baggage. Each thought in my mind became another link in a chain that shackled me. Throughout many of these years of mindful enslavement, I was conditioned by depression. Oftentimes, I would retreat in solitude, yet despite how the world around me perceived such actions, I was focused with purpose. Here in myself, I gathered my thoughts and I did my homework. Now gifted with thought, I was able to analyze my diagnosis and demand my emancipation. I have learned that my depression was not due to self-esteem, rather my disappointment in the world around me. I expected better from many of you. I assumed many of you expected better of yourself. Our friends and neighbors, our enemies and haters, all of them together in one simple, neat little word. The good, the bad, the ugly, the rich, the poor, and everything in between. Society has them all. Without the overarching structures we understand to be society, our lives will still be that of rude beings, hiding from the world as opposed to making our place within it. Still, there is the question of what makes society good and what makes it bad. There isn't an easy answer for the question, no cut and dry aphorism to sum up what is now the core of human existence, our place within society. Nor should they be. Society must be good and bad. Like anything worth knowing, it must be full of challenges and hurdles, rewards and pitfalls, honors and dishonors. Otherwise, what is the point? We could simply abstain from society and go it alone, but society must first exist to be present for it to be absent. To leave society, one must first join it. Though there isn't an easy answer for what makes a good society, we can clearly tell what makes a bad one. Greed, self-interest, xenophobia, racism, hate, war. If only the knowledge of these things made them easier to spot, to eradicate, to demolish, but oftentimes there's the very complexity of society itself, the inherent assemblage of systems which lead society both its power and its terror. That both must be inherent is perhaps not so obvious. Society must endure the terrors in order to understand the limits of its own power. For most of us to develop ourselves as individuals, we must experience the pratfalls and swells of society. We cannot all turn our backs in the world and become islands living off the grid until the grid decides at once what we have amassed. For better or worse, society is here to stay, and we should all be in it to see society become better, because we all are a part of it, not because we are apart from it. I'm currently the producer and host of a nationally syndicated radio show titled Shefik Presents Invocation, as well as an internationally syndicated video series of the same name. Through my show, I provide a platform where I explore the various facets of life and I question of others to speak on the journey of their own life, which may lend to dictate the character of their composition and its meaning. Based on the given topic of discussion that I pose, such meaning can be derived from personal experiences, anecdotes, mantras, or even passive observation. Although my own voice can be heard in the show, I have yet to expound in greater detail the journey of my own life. That is, until today. I'm currently celebrating over 20 years as a professional in the industries of media and technology. Throughout my extensive career, I was fortunate to hold senior level positions at a vast number of Fortune 500 companies and notable brands, as I still do even today. In fact, one of my former employers was Columbia Law School right here at Columbia University. I would not have been able to achieve this milestone if I was not able to not only think of the conditions of the box that contained me, but also able to think outside of the box, which liberated me. On July 4th, 2016, I broadcast the first episode of my radio show on 20 terrestrial radio stations throughout the United States. As the country celebrated Independence Day, I celebrated my own independence. As such, the designated topic of that episode was revolution. At this time, I was not alone in solitude. We all want to change the world. Well, most of us anyway. So where do you stand when others fall? As we talk about revolution, about the turning of tides from one wave to the next, let us drown ourselves, at least for a moment, in definition. So what is revolution? Different strokes for different folks, perhaps? Each perspective likely could define the word in their own individual context. So it's helpful to have one common understanding from which to start. The Oxford Dictionary firstly defines revolution as a forcible overthrow of a government or social order in favor of a new system. Before we proceed further, let's yield to the simple truth that overthrowing a government via revolution may not lead to a favorable new system. As suggested by use of the term forcible, the action may result in desperate regurgitation of the old system, disguised in a respiration of a new attire. Must all revolution be forcible? Is this an immutable law of humanity that in order to have a new system, one must forcibly remove the old? Can we not have a revolution for revolution, an evolution of revolution? In a concrete manner, revolution should hearken to the second definition, which portrays an instance of revolving. As suggested, such definition commands the movement of an object in a circular or elliptical course around another, or about an axis or center. Naturally, this orbits more questions than answers, amassing the center as nothing less than abstraction. In practical terms, in mathematical terms, it can be quantified. However, in layman terms, the center is a nebulous concept. It's a cloud of ideas and actions that reign as a resulting storm. So what is revolution today? What are we circling around? What are we waiting to overthrow? I don't have answers for these questions to relish upon. In fact, they may not be any digestible answers at all. It could be that revolutionaries simply make it up as they go along. As such, they may be classified as reactionaries first and revolutionaries second. This most likely will not sit well with those who self-describe themselves as a revolutionary. Perhaps there is something evolutionary in our need to be revolutionary. Herein lies our calling card. The journey continues right here and everywhere. Thank you.